We're here to help you get truly clued in on the big stories. And today, we're diving into something significant that came up recently, August 19th. South Africa's minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, she flat out denied any rumors that the country might be facing a coup. Now, this wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. It landed right in the middle of a lot of public talk, media speculation. You think back to the really serious unrest in July 2021, the ongoing governance stuff, and, well, the fact that we have seen coups in other African countries lately. So it really frames our main question for this deep dive. Is South Africa genuinely safe from that kind of threat, or is the picture maybe a bit more complicated? Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's do that, because our goal here is really to get past those surface-level headlines.
Yeah.
We want to help you understand the real dynamics of national stability, democratic resilience, especially somewhere like South Africa. It's complex.
Definitely. And maybe the best place to start is with South Africa's democratic strengths, because they are considerable. Since '94, end of apartheid, it's really been seen as one of Africa's most stable democracies. But it's more than just stability, isn't it? It's the constitutional setup itself. People talk about it globally. Separation of powers, a strong Bill of Rights. And these key institutions, the Constitutional Court, Public Protector, Human Rights Commission, they're designed to be barriers, like a firewall against concentrating power.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it, a firewall. They're not just symbolic. They actively enforce accountability. It makes grabbing power much, much harder than in many places where coups have happened. That institutional depth is key.
And what about the military, the SANEDF, the South African National Defense Force? How does that compare?
Well, that's another really crucial difference. Unlike in, say, Mali or Burkina Faso, the SANDF has this history of professionalism. It's kept under strict civilian control. Civil-military relations are generally professional. They operate within clear legal mandates, parliamentary oversight. It's not a politicized force in the same way.
That seems like a huge factor.
It is. It means the military itself generally stays out of politics, a massive safeguard.
And then there's another layer, South Africa's civil society. It's incredibly active, right? And the free press, they really function as watchdogs, don't they? Constantly looking at what the government's doing, shaping public debate. It feels like an extra safety net.
Absolutely. An extra layer of protection is a good term. They provide accountability from the ground up. So what's fascinating here is how South Africa still possesses this level of institutional strength that, frankly, many coup-prone countries just lack. These democratic safeguards are deep-rooted.
Okay, so that's the strong foundation. But, like you said, it's complex. Even strong foundations can show cracks. What are the vulnerabilities we need to be looking at? The things that are causing concern?
Right, because despite that robust framework, you can't ignore the growing pressures. The main worries, well, they really boil down to a few key things. Political instability, socioeconomic inequality, which is huge, and, importantly, weak state capacity.
Let's take political instability first. The ANC, the African National Congress, in power since '94. It's no secret they're dealing with a lot of internal conflict, factionalism. We saw that explode in July 2021, right? Sparked by former President Zuma's jailing. But it showed how quickly political fights can spill out into major violence. Plus, you have ongoing issues like state capture allegations, corruption, patronage, all chipping away at public trust.
Definitely chipping away. You see in the surveys like Afrobarometer, public trust in institutions, it's been declining pretty steadily.
And that decline in trust must connect to the socioeconomic side, too.
Oh, absolutely. You can't disconnect them. South Africa is still, statistically, the most unequal country in the world. That Gini coefficient of 0.63, it's stark. And this isn't just numbers on a page. You have massive unemployment, around 32%, persistent failures in basic services. So these service delivery protests you hear about, they're not isolated incidents, they're common. And they often turn violent, clashes between communities, security forces. It highlights these really deep systemic vulnerabilities.
Systemic vulnerabilities, yeah. And that links to the state's ability to actually function, the weak capacity you mentioned, things like corruption scandals, police inefficiency. They weaken the state's authority, don't they? The July 2021 unrest seemed to really expose that. Deficiencies in intelligence and law enforcement response, even political leadership seemed overwhelmed.
It did. It showed alarming gaps.
Right.
And look, if your state institutions can't manage large-scale unrest effectively, their legitimacy takes a hit. And that indirectly can create space for actors who want to challenge the system itself.
What about the security forces themselves? Are they under pressure?
They are. The SANEDF, despite its professionalism, is facing challenges. Underfunding is a big one. Being stretched thin with peacekeeping duties, outdated equipment, budget cuts. And the police, SAPS, they face constant criticism too. training issues, corruption within the ranks, sometimes excessive force.
So strong institutions on paper, but under real strain in practice.
Exactly. It's a paradox.
This raises an important question then. How do these internal pressures, which, you might see echoes of elsewhere, how do they uniquely play out in South Africa given its specific context?
That's a great question, because while things like inequality or political infighting aren't unique, South Africa's combination is. You have extreme inequality alongside quite strong democratic institutions and a very vocal civil society. It creates a unique dynamic. Now, if we look across the continent at that recent wave of coups, Mali, Guinea, Chad, Sudan, Burkina Faso, Niger, between 2020 and 2023.
Yeah, there was a definite pattern there.
There was. And you see common threads. Weak institutions in those places, militaries getting involved in politics, socioeconomic crises, fueling discontent, popular disillusionment, sometimes external actors stirring the pot.
Like Russia or France being mentioned sometimes.
Right. Now, here's where South Africa is different, and it's the point we keep coming back to. The military. It just doesn't have that history of intervention. It's institutionally separate from politics and under civilian control. That's a fundamental difference.
Okay, that's the key difference. But are there similarities that are worrying?
Yes, and this is crucial. South Africa faces massive socioeconomic pressures and serious governance problems, just like some of those other countries did. Think about July 2021 again. Nearly 400 deaths, billions in damages. That level of violence and chaos. It reflected the kind of state fragility that, unfortunately, has been a precursor to coups elsewhere.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Look at Mali's coup in 2020. It came after years of public anger about corruption and the government's inability to handle insecurity. Or Burkina Faso in 2022, triggered largely by rising insecurity and frustration with the state's response.
Right. South Africa doesn't have the same kind of jihadist insurgency problem, but the types of frustration.
Exactly. The root causes of discontent, the corruption, the staggering unemployment, the inequality, these are very similar feelings to what fueled unrest elsewhere. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see that while the immediate triggers for instability might look different across countries, those underlying social and economic frustrations often share a common root. And that means vigilance is crucial everywhere.
That really puts it in perspective. Okay, so despite those serious vulnerabilities and parallels, South Africa does have specific things working in its favor, mechanisms that make a traditional coup less likely. Let's revisit those. We talked about the strong constitutional norms. The Constitution is respected, right? Both inside the country and internationally.
Very much so. Trying to just tear it up would provoke huge resistance. Legal, civil society, international partners. It's not just paper.
And its position in the world. South Africa's a leader in the AU SADC BRICS.
Right. Its regional and international standing is significant. A coup would completely trash that standing. It would face intense international scrutiny, sanctions likely, and lose its influence. The diplomatic and economic costs would be enormous, much higher than for some smaller, less integrated nations.
That makes sense. A powerful deterrent.
Definitely.
And we keep mentioning civil society in the media. That vigilance remains a key safeguard.
Absolutely. They act as a constant check, making it harder for any authoritarian moves to happen quietly. They amplify dissent and demand accountability.
And finally, back to the military that professional tradition holds.
It does. The SANDF leadership consistently affirms loyalty to the Constitution, not to any political faction. It hasn't been politicized to the degree you see in states where coups are more frequent. So look, these aren't just abstract ideas. They are real, active forces that have genuinely protected South Africa's democracy from those kinds of overt, sudden shifts. They form the democratic backbone.
Okay, so that brings us to maybe the most critical insight here. A traditional military coup, tanks on the streets, probably unlikely. But is there another kind of threat, something maybe more insidious?
Yes, and this is really the core of the issue for South Africa today. While that classic coup seems improbable, the country faces what you could call a similarly grave threat. Widespread social unrest combined with a slow, gradual erosion of the state's ability to function.
Let's go back to July 2021 one more time. It spread so fast, KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng. It really showed how fragile social cohesion can be. It started around Zuma's jailing, but it quickly became about much more, didn't it? Poverty, inequality, joblessness, anger at the government.
It absolutely did. The initial spark became almost irrelevant as deeper frustrations boiled over. And here's the crucial takeaway from that. The state really struggled to manage it. The scale of the looting, the sabotage, the community violence. It showed that massive unrest can destabilize the country almost as much as a coup could, without the military needing to be involved directly.
So here's where it gets really interesting then. This points to a different kind of security challenge for South Africa. The real danger isn't necessarily military intervention, but these recurring cycles of protest and unrest that eat away at the democratic system's legitimacy over time. Is that right?
That's precisely it. When huge segments of the population feel left out, when services fail month after month, year after year, when corruption seems rampant and unchecked, unrest stops being an exception and starts becoming just, well, part of the political landscape. And each major flare-up weakens institutions a little more, leaves people more disillusioned. It risks becoming a vicious cycle of instability.
And how does that cycle actually weaken democracy itself, even without a coup?
Well, it can be just as effective, just slower. Persistent instability creates fertile ground for, say, political opportunists. Populist leaders might emerge promising to restore order, but potentially by overriding democratic norms and checks and balances.
Kind of a strongman appeal, claiming the country needs a strong hand to stop the chaos.
Exactly. Or you might just see a gradual decay. Checks and balances get ignored, dissent gets suppressed bit by bit, accountability fades. The democracy might still exist on paper, but it becomes hollowed out. The loss is slow, but it's just as significant in the end.
So those safeguards we talked about, the Constitution, the professional military, civil society, the courts, they're still important.
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
They are the bulwarks. But, and this is the vital caveat, their effectiveness depends entirely on political leaders respecting their independence and ensuring they have the resources and support they need to actually function. If they're undermined or starved of funds, their protective power diminishes.
So what does this all mean for South Africa's path forward then? It sounds like complacency is the real enemy here.
It really is. Because the underlying conditions, the things that have enabled coups or democratic backsliding elsewhere on the continent, you see echoes of them in South Africa's vulnerabilities.
Like what specifically?
Well, think about decision-making getting paralyzed by political infighting within the ruling party.
Yeah.
Think about the ongoing drip, drip, drip of corruption scandals, from the state capture stuff down to just basic local government maladministration. And the service delivery failures are relentless for many communities. Water shortages, the load-shedding power cuts, crumbling roads and infrastructure. It all adds up to a really volatile mix.
So that July 2021 violence,
Yeah.
it wasn't just a one-off event.
It really should be seen as a major warning sign, not an anomaly. Unless the root causes, the poverty, the inequality, the joblessness, the corruption are tackled head-on, South Africa risks getting stuck in that cycle where unrest becomes normalized. And even if the military stays in the barracks, democracy itself could slowly bleed out.
Okay, so let's try and bring this all together for you listening. Minister Ntshavheni's statement that a military coup isn't on the cards for South Africa. Based on everything we've looked at, that seems, well, accurate. The conditions for that specific scenario aren't really there.
Right. And this is the profound final insight. The real challenge for South Africa is grappling with a different, perhaps more pernicious kind of democratic fragility. It's not about generals plotting in secret. It's about the slow burn of institutions being weakened by deep, unsolved systemic problems.
Which means that just relying on the country's strong past, its institutional legacy, its constitution, it's not enough on its own. South Africa has to tackle those underlying drivers of instability, poverty, inequality, governance failures with real urgency and clarity. That seems to be the key takeaway for preserving its democracy long term.
That's the crux of it.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. What happens to a country when it seems to be drifting towards a future where democracy is, nominally still there, the structures look intact, but it's fundamentally undermined? Its legitimacy just slowly eroded by constant instability and the feeling that people's basic needs and aspirations just aren't being met. It's a complex and critical question, not just for South Africa, but globally too. Thank you for joining us